Good morning, evening, afternoon, everyone. I am Dorm. This is Dorm Streams, and welcome to Dorm Film, a new idea where I talk about movies I just watched and we sort of review them, sort of a breakdown of how I feel about them. And today we're going to be talking about The Apartment. You may be wondering why I watched a movie from 1960 just seemingly out of nowhere. Well, this movie is on AFI, which is the American Film Institute. It's on their top 100 movies. They sort of do this every generation or so. I think the last time they did this was in the early 2000s, but they called it the 100 Years, 100 Movies list. So there are 100 movies on this list. I'm trying to sort of slowly work my way through them. The Apartment is a movie starring Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, two names that are pretty synonymous with older Hollywood, although I'd argue I know Shirley MacLaine more for a little bit later work. But Jack Lemmon is very old Hollywood in this movie. I think a good way to describe this movie, just to start, is old Hollywood without feeling old. So what I mean by that is a lot of times when you go back and watch movies from this era, 60 is probably the turning point for sort of old Hollywood feeling stuff. I would say once you get into the mid 60s, things start changing a little bit more, especially once you get into like 70. But right at 60 still feels very old Hollywood. But certain things about this movie make it feel super modern. Shirley MacLaine's character, Fran, she sort of sets the standard for like attractive sad girl in Hollywood. This is a trope we've seen a lot. It's sort of a break off of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl kind of thing, where she sort of has, I feel like Fran, if Fran existed today, she would be very sad memeing on Twitter, probably about being depressed. And I feel like that's what the kind of character she is. And for 1960, that seems very modern. A couple other things feel really modern about this movie. One, just the performances. Jack Lemmon isn't super like Broadway old comedy, like that kind of vibe. He's sort of subtle in his comedy. There's a moment in the movie where he is grabbing some gloves off of his couch while he's dancing, and he doesn't want the woman in his apartment to see it. And so he's sort of like awkwardly trying to keep dancing, but also hiding the gloves. I loved that moment. It's only about 30 seconds. Really made me laugh. I guess I should sort of go into what this movie is about too. So Jack Lemmon's character, C.C. Baxter, which is just a great name. His character has an apartment that people at his office, this giant, I think, insurance firm, they use it as sort of like a place for them to bring like their girlfriends. So a lot of these men have wives, and so instead of using a hotel or like one of them mentions using a drive-in at some point, they use this apartment to get away. So he sort of schedules people to come into the apartment and use it as sort of as an in-between, or as a place to take their mistresses, basically. So that's the basic plot of the movie. I won't get too far into it because I don't want to spoil it. But also that in its own feels very modern for 1960. Again, coming out of the 50s, it feels like every time I go back and watch movies like that, like this would be super scandalous at the time, I feel like. This as a central plot for a sort of lighthearted but also dramatic. This movie's tone is kind of hard to nail down because there are a lot of comedic moments, but some of them play a little bit more distressing than they do comedic, and I don't know if that's on purpose or not. I was fine with it. But maybe that's just a tonal shift. Maybe I'm more concerned about the characters and their well-being than people would be watching a movie in 1960, right? Maybe it was supposed to be more like, oh, this is hilarious, but now I'm just like, is everybody okay? But a lot of it again feels modern. There's a lot of cinematography that I was really impressed with for a movie this old. Again, I hate to say the movie from 1960 feels old, but it's 60 years old now. So I mean, I think at this point it's reached the threshold. There's a shot about 3/4 of the way through the movie where Jack Lemmon is sitting at a bar, and I feel like if it were a movie just a little bit older, they would have just done a normal, just the bars, almost like I am right now, right? Like the bar's in front of him, he's talking basically to camera without looking at it. Instead, there's sort of this cool, I don't know if it's a crane shot or what it is, but this sort of like half overhead, sort of elongated shot of the bar, and I really liked it. It felt more like despair, which is what they were trying to do in the scene. I just thought that was a really cool directing decision. There's a lot of really cool, subtle directing decisions. Just the way they shoot the kitchen, the way they shoot the apartment without it feeling like there's, a lot of the scenes happen in the apartment. It is the title of the movie. and it never feels stale. I think they change up the way they shoot it and just the way the apartment is laid out and the way they sort of expose rooms as the film goes on. So for early in the apartment, or early in the movie, when they show the apartment, it's just the living room, basically. It's just the main room. And then you start to see the kitchen, then you start to see the bathroom. This is all like little simple stuff, but it keeps you intrigued. It keeps you just sort of, even if you're not thinking about it, it keeps you involved because you're learning more about this apartment. Also, I don't know if it was just the version I was watching. This movie looks fantastic. I know that there was a point in black and white filmmaking where it was much better quality than color of the same era. That goes back to photography as well. Even if you look at like sports photographs from like the 60s, they're way better if they are black and white because they had sort of mastered black and white when color was like a whole new thing. This movie looks so crisp. It looks very HD. It almost reminds me of something like Nebraska or The Artist, movies where they are black and white, but they're shot on modern cameras. It's very, very good looking in a number of ways. Obviously, directorially, I really like the way it looks, but also just the actual quality of the film is really, really nice. And again, I think this movie just feels modern, but if you have that old Hollywood nostalgia, it's perfect. It has sort of the song and danciness, not like a musical, but I think that's a good way to describe old Hollywood, right? It's sort of this is all a show, this is all very performance-y. It's way more like a play than it is just like a film. And I credit it for that. I think it transitions the narrative really well. I think it's like a really good stage play made into a really good film. I think there's a lot of crossover there. Obviously, it was written for screen, but it has that sort of play. It stays in one set a lot. There's a small cast, which I always love. You will find out if I keep doing this series that I absolutely love small casts. And yeah, I think the supporting cast is good. Shirley MacLaine is gorgeous and just very effervescent despite not being some sort of like Katharine Hepburn zany character, right? She is very likable despite not being all over the place, which I think is another testament of how modern this film feels. Jack Lemmon, again, really, really good, really funny. And I wouldn't even consider this a comedy, but there's a lot of funny moments in it. I like the tone of it. I think it's a really fun watch. I think the beginning is pretty slow. The movie, basically all the positive points I've talked about from the movie, they all sort of come from, I would say, the second half, maybe the last third, when you really sort of have all the plot elements. I think it'd be a little bit shorter. I think they do a little bit too much exposition. I think you kind of catch on with what's going on at this apartment pretty quickly. But other than that, I think this movie is a really fun watch. It holds up really, really well. Again, it has sort of that familiarity of old Hollywood where I feel like I'm Macaulay Culkin watching that fake movie in Home Alone, right? It just feels like a morning, I'm just going to spend an hour or two and watch a movie, and I really like it. So with that, I'm giving The Apartment from 1960, I'm giving it 4 stars out of 5. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for taking a chance on DormFilm, this new idea. If you liked the video, make sure to subscribe and hit like. I'm going to be doing more of these as I watch more movies. And thank you to the patrons over at patreon.com/stormstreams for making this possible, for letting me try to take chances on stuff like this. If you want to become one of those patrons that I hold so dearly, you can do so at patreon.com/stormstreams. You can also follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/stormstreams. We always start with a little bit of just chatting before we get into games. Come talk to me about movies or TV shows or games or whatever you're up to. All right, see you soon.